everyone, and welcome to the LatinX Business Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Gomez, and if you're looking to demystify the world of business through the raw, authentic stories of Latinx entrepreneurs, you've come to the right place. As someone with an MBA and an IRS enrolled agent license, I've spent years helping freelancers, partnerships, and S corporations navigate the often tricky waters of the US tax law. Now, I'm bringing that expertise and passion to this community right here. So thank you for tuning in, and you know what? It's time to talk business. Welcome, friends. Today I'm very excited to present to you guys Richard Xavier Corral. He is the CEO and principal consultant at Corral Consulting. Richard Xavier Corral, MPP, brings over 18 years of professional experience along with a lifelong commitment to advancing the business of social change among the nonprofit, for-profit, corporate, community-based, government, and philanthropic organizations with whom he consults. Mr. Corral seamlessly integrates his extensive formal studies, passion for building business know-how, and big picture problem solving to craft win-win solutions around education, health, wellness, green economies, LGBT equality, philanthropy, housing, homelessness, and dockless mobility. Corral Consulting's diverse clientele benefits from a comprehensive set of skills, strategies, content expertise, and network rarely assembled in one firm that are essential to affecting change in today's fast-paced world. What distinguishes Corral Consulting is their ability to empower clients to move from vision to action by crafting workable solutions that cut across business, community, and policy. Mr. Corral received a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from the University of California at Berkeley. He has a Master's in Public Policy from the UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs, and it's a Public Policy and International Affairs Fellow. And with that, my folks, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Richard Xavier Corral.
Oh, Randy, it is absolutely my pleasure. So thankful to connect with you, even if it is virtually during the phase 2 of the pandemic. You know, I've always been super impressed and thankful for not only you as a person, but also you as a professional and your sort of tenacity and vision when it comes to serving our community, the valuable services that you provide, and also, you know, your innovation when it comes to showcasing and featuring your community through this podcast. I think that's great, and I'm very thankful and supportive of your continued work.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that because sometimes, you know, you're in the trenches working every day and you're like, this is a lot, you know, like, you know, after high school, college, there's no more prices on a daily basis or weekly basis, but I do appreciate that. And, you know, I also think that you bring a lot to the community and you also have tons and tons of resources, which was, you know, when I reached out, or I forget if you reached out to me actually, I was like, yes, we need to have you on the show because I know you have a wealth of information. You are also in a very unique, you know, service-based industry where you consult, which, you know, a lot of people, especially a lot of young folk who want to get out there after working for a couple of corporate companies, you know, want to become consultants. So I definitely wanted to go through your journey, and then we can talk about other resources you have available, because I know you're part of a number of groups. But yeah, let's start with like the first couple questions that are, you know, housekeeping items. So in terms of your preferred pronouns, what is it? What's the one that you prefer, and what should we go by during the?
He, him, and his is just fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then in terms of the Latinx community, how do you identify within that community?
I definitely identify as Latinx, queer, Chicano. It really just depends on who I'm speaking to, the community that I am in or a part of. Even geography, to a certain extent, plays a role in identity and how I identify myself at any given moment.
Got it. Okay. You know what? I'm actually kind of glad you present it that way because there's something about terms, right, and identity for me that's very important. Because to the outside world, we could just be labeled all as one, right?
Right.
For
Right.
example, in California, all Mexicans, right? So,
Right.
which is not the case, right? So many
Right.
people come from many different backgrounds, right? But I also find it very important for people to be able to choose their identity and to decide when and how they identify. So I'm glad you bring that topic up of, it depends even geographically, like meaning like you might be on the East Coast one day, you might be on the West side, on the West Coast
Exactly.
one day, right? So that it could change. And even the term Chicano, right? It's very prominent amongst a lot of Latinx people who grew up in the 90s, right? Who went through college in the 90s.
Correct.
So yeah, there's very specific history there that, I think it's important to remember, but I also 100% agree that anyone is free to choose the best identity for themselves, and how they want to be quote unquote labeled. Okay, so tell me a little bit, just before we go into some other questions, tell me more, like, where's your family from? Like, I know you're here from LA, but where is your family originally from?
Great. So, my family is originally from Mexico on both sides. So my father's side of the family is from Chihuahua, and my mother's side of the family is from Guanajuato, specifically Irapuato, Guanajuato. And it's interesting because, in terms of my family, I really have grown to appreciate and have embraced both sides of my family in terms of not only where they're from, but also the traditions, the mentality, as well as the unique values and skills that they bring to the table. And although there's exceptions, of course, to these generalizations, my father's side of the family is really sort of the academic side, is the sort of intellectual side. We have folks
Mm,
that were research librarians at UCLA, folks who continued their education well into their elder years, as well as activists. A lot of sort of my activist roots, as well as my academic and intellectual roots, come from my dad's side of the
yeah.
family. And even as way far back as, my grandmother, when she came to this country, she became very politically active and involved, and even went so far as to host tamalazos at her house in Lincoln Heights for the then city council member Roy Ball. So it
Mm,
goes those traditions, those precedents go way back, all the way to sort of my grandmother on my father's side. And then in terms of my mother's side, I definitely get a lot more of my social, going out, being engaged in a community in a very, social way. It's also
mhm.
where I definitely have a lot of business owner and business leadership acumen from my mother's side of the family. When they first came to this country, they were some of the first business owners in El Monte, and even went so far as to establish the La Historia Society in El Monte, which is the curators of the museum, the historical museum in El Monte. So, anyways, there's other interesting stories as well in terms of my father's side of the family and their
Yeah.
very sort of political and revolutionary roots that actually go back to Luz Corral de Villa, who is the only recognized legitimate legal wife of Pancho Villa.
Oh, wow.
So she's
Okay.
from Chihuahua.
So we have a star within this podcast. So, right? You have some star heritage right there with Pancho Villa. That's insane. What's funny? Like, you're going through both your parents' side, your mom's side, your dad's side. And for me, I can totally see this, right? When I met you, you are 100% like a business person. You are also the 100% like an activist. You provide resources not only to people around you, but groups that you're part of. And I see it. I see both sides. So It's kind of like your foundation of who you are now. Like definitely, it comes from the roots of your family, right? Your mom and your dad's side, which I think is so beautiful because you don't get to really know that about someone, especially if you're networking. Me and you met at these networking groups, and like sometimes you're like, sometimes I don't have the best attention span, right? So like, I'm like, okay, 5 minutes here, and move on to the next person, and that's what you're taught. Really, you're taught that you need to move on and you need to make a couple contacts and see if any of those contacts are going to be viable business, right? So
Right.
I love what you just said. I love hearing that. But in terms of your personal background, tell me a little bit more about like how did you get into the consulting industry? How did that happen for you? And take us through that journey.
Absolutely. It actually started in graduate school when I was at UCLA in the Master's in Public Policy program. Then it was called the School of Public Affairs. Now it's the Luskin School of Public Affairs.
Okay.
And while I was there were several, I guess, job fairs, you could call them, where they were sort of brown bag lunches where different industries would attend and share their perspectives and their stories on their industry. And I recall representatives from the big five consulting firms like KPMG, as well as McKinsey, Deloitte,
Right.
Anderson, those major consulting firms, they all presented and attended and shared, what they do and how they do it. And I was very impressed at the time with the work that they did. However, there was one major issue that I had, which was, and to be clear, this was over 20 years ago. This was in approximately 2000. So, it's about 20 years ago. And even at that time, especially at that time, the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion were not what they are today. Let's put it that way. And, the representatives that showed up and who they were, I took issue with, because in my mind, I realized that the service that was being provided was valuable. It was essential. However, I didn't see folks that represented the communities that I was from, that I wanted to serve. They weren't showing up, and they certainly weren't on the client roster, right? And so this was concerning to me, because obviously I knew the communities that I'm from needed these services desperately, but they obviously weren't they were not receiving these services, and also they were not being represented in these firms. So what I decided to do is I said, well, let me get these skills first. Let me develop a practice. So what I ended up doing is I ended up working for UCLA research centers for about 7 years that did a lot of social impact, public benefit, social services work and analysis and research. And so through those 7 years of experience, I was able to develop a network of folks in government, nonprofit, and philanthropic sectors that were trying to have some sort of social impact or to advance the social good, as well as to develop the necessary hard and soft skills to develop, pitch, and move projects forward. And so after the 7 years, I decided it was time for me to go on my own. And I started off very small. I had a studio apartment, which was really, take it back, it was actually technically a 1-bedroom, but it was a converted garage in Glassell Park. I didn't have a car at the time. But what I did have, and the only thing that allowed me to actually conduct my business when I opened I went full-time back in 2010. I opened in 2008. I went full-time in 2010. The only thing that allowed me to actually conduct my business was, at the time it came out, I don't know if you remember, but Google Maps did an integration with public transit back in around 2009, 2010. And what it allowed you to do is to, map a route from point A to point B, but it also then integrated the bus routes, right, and the trains and everything. So I was able to, with a fair amount of precision, be able to, make appointments, but then also know the exact time that I would need to take to walk to the bus stop, wait for the bus, get the bus. And then I would even I would even put my shirt, my clothes in my bag, and I would arrive early and I would go into like the restroom and I would basically put on my shirt so it didn't get all wrinkled. If I was all sweaty, it was during the summer, whatever. Allow myself a little bit of time before my meetings to basically get dressed, and then
Right.
I'd go to the meetings, and they would never know that I just came from the bus or whatever, however I worked it out. And sometimes in LA it gets hot in the summertime, and you don't want to show up to those business meetings looking like a sweaty mess.
No, definitely not. Business School 101. Oh, for sure. Oh man, that's such a hustler mentality and mindset. Who would have thought, of course I didn't meet you when you were starting your business, but by the time I met you, you are full throttle running a business, consulting for a lot of different organizations. So that's why I'm so grateful sometimes for my podcast, because I'm learning so much more about these people who I've either met before or they're fairly new, people who are coming on the show. But, yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. I'm sure there's people out there who are saying oh, I can't start a business, or I don't have the money, or I don't have capital to start a business, right? But this is America. This is really, literally one of the places where you can start a business.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I didn't have anybody. I started all by myself. But what I was also doing at the time, even back then, I was working virtually, to the best of my ability in terms of technology. So that actually came in handy, particularly during COVID, because as my business grew over the past 12 years, I always had, my roots were a virtual business that had low overhead, so that I could pass that savings onto my clients and be able to serve the types of communities, individuals, and businesses that I wanted to serve. So that was part of the business model, was from the beginning, was having low overhead, working virtually, and passing on, that savings so that we could serve the folks in the community to serve. So when the pandemic hit, it really was a very easy transition. It wasn't jarring. It didn't really impact our bottom line, and we were able to continue to work successfully. But that's because of, the roots, the genesis of the business when it first started back in 2010.
Yes. And you know what? I'm glad you bring up the pandemic. How has that affected or increased your business right now? Because so many industries, actually, I could probably say all industries across the board were affected one way or another. But I definitely saw some, let's just give restaurants, for example, they shut down. It was something so unprecedented, where when have you seen restaurants shut down, right? But how about your business? Give us a little bit more about were you able to increase, some contacts, or were you able to just take on more clients because more people were willing to go online?
Yeah, to be honest with you, it really did not impact our business. We had long-standing clients that we had secured prior to the pandemic that we have been working with virtually. And my firm now has grown to include about 15 consultants that work off and on different projects. And we were able to pretty much just continue. But what did change is the way in which the work that we support is actually implemented. So, for example, one of the most significant examples is one of our longtime clients, the United LatinX Fund, which is a philanthropy that serves Greater Southern California and actually invests in nonprofit solutions that impact or benefit the Latinx community, specifically around jobs and housing. They really pivoted and we helped to facilitate the pivot around their programming, which really went online and helped to take an original or a pre-existing in-person event series called the Salon series, and it then brought that in-person event to an online format, and it became the Fireside Charla series, which actually continues to this day. We're actually going to the next installment of the online series this Thursday. It's going to be on street vendors and both the policy as well as the legal and economic challenges as well as solutions that the street vending industry currently faces here in Southern California and throughout the state. So that's just an example of how our business model for the firm, it really remained the same. However, the actual service that we provided and how it was implemented, it did pivot, it did change in certain instances with certain clients.
Okay. I'm just trying to think, like, in terms of like different implementations of the services, is it, I guess maybe before you were more hands-on, you were inside the actual, offices or buildings, and now you're implementing strategies and different ideas like all online?
Correct. That's absolutely correct. And increasingly, our business model has accommodated the new, I would say, COVID marketplace by really enhancing and beefing up our online communications practice. Mm-hmm. We always had a strong communications practice, but it's just really, I would say, grown or blossomed during COVID because due to necessity. I mean, that is really the only way to communicate is online. So our existing practice really, but through necessity, became, I think, more sophisticated. It became much more robust, and frankly, clients were needing it and asking for it. So, and that's something that we really pride ourselves on. Is I really set out, and it didn't happen overnight, but I really set out to be able to provide a comprehensive suite of services, of business management and consulting services, which I did that because I knew that I never wanted to be in a position, particularly with our community-based clients, where we would have to say no, right? Where we would have to say, oh, I'm sorry, we don't do that. And the reason why I didn't want that is because that creates some inconsistencies in how business is conducted. If you finish a project and you're not able to take it to the next level, or if you're not able to actually implement the strategies and the recommendations. So I really worked hard to establish what I call 360 comprehensive service suite of services. And communications is one of those things that's just really taken off and grown more and more over the years to include not just social media, but also video production, as well as now taking it to another level is a lot of our clients are being asked to actually participate in communications campaigns, right? Where we are engaging and connecting to the Latinx community and providing them with targeted information that they need, whether it's around COVID or vaccinations or even redistricting. These are all very important topics that impact our community. And when you have strong communications and robust followings and targeted populations that you engage over time, it's important. It's a significant value added to many of these important public issues that need to be addressed and educated on and engaged.
Yeah, no, I totally see how, especially right now in COVID era in 2021, we're like a second year into this. Like, how else would we have get all of this information out to people, aside from like the traditional like radio and print and stuff? Like nowadays, I think there's the barrier to enter the field that you want to go into, or like to get information that is essential or that you need, right? Everything's online now. So Definitely. I agree. Like I definitely agree that everything is going online. But the thing is, nowadays you can provide that information a lot easier, I guess you would say. I don't know if it's easier to manage like social media accounts or to do like interviews on TV and stuff like that. But it's still like if you no longer are allowed to touch people or contact them in person, like how else would we have done or continue working throughout this pandemic, if that makes sense?
Exactly. You're exactly right. And being able to know how to manage an entire, portfolio of communications activities, of which social media is just one. Interviews is just one, but you also have, managing websites. You also have
Yeah.
media and press alerts. You also have newsletter maintenance and publication. You also have engagement around online events now, online event production. So there really is this growing kind of suite of communications activities and strategies, and they require a significant amount of maintenance. It's all really about maintaining and growing that base. So anyways, that's just something that was always part of our practice, but it just got a big boost of
Right.
practice during COVID.
Okay. And so I know you work with a lot of like nonprofits, right? And governmental agencies. So to be a little bit of a like devil, right? What would you say to someone that says like the money's not there to be working with the nonprofit? The nonprofits don't pay, or like the reason I bring this up is because you mentioned something earlier about follow up, right? To actually implementation of the strategies that you guys present to these organizations, right? So every phase, I'm very aware of that. Every phase is going to have like a cost, associated with it. So what would you tell someone that, talking about there's no money with the nonprofit world to be made?
So when I was first starting out, I had this vision of an upside down pyramid, and this is something that's really served me in terms of how to envision and implement my business model as an upside down pyramid. And what I mean by that is, if you think about an inverted pyramid, at the top is obviously the largest area of the pyramid. And so I thought, I have to have a good mix of clients in order to not only sustain my business, but also in many ways to kind of subsidize those clients, nonprofit or otherwise, that maybe aren't as lucrative, right?
Okay.
And so I realized that at the top of the pyramid, I had to have a few sort of clients that actually could pay more of a market rate. And those have a tendency to be some of my private clients, right?
Right.
And I do have, my firm over the years has grown and has served clients in all different sectors. So we currently serve for-profit, nonprofit, Fortune 500, corporate, and we're able to do that because we have a core set of skills, and those skills are essentially Business 101. And Business 101 is a skill that is needed across every sector, not just for-profit, right? The basics of business. So to that end, we can apply those skills to any client in any sector, and we do. And so if you're going back to the pyramid, we kind of front load our business model with clients that are more able to pay a market rate, and at least have a good number of those at the top of the pyramid. You get to the middle, and those could be more of our subsidized clients, maybe clients that are more high end or more high level or lucrative nonprofits, larger nonprofits. And then we always have space at the bottom, right, of the pyramid, which is the smallest space, which is where we are able to do pro bono work as well as our board work, which at times is either minimally compensated or not compensated at all. And I really do, believe it or not, approach the boards that I sit on with the perspective that basically I'm providing essentially free consulting, to these nonprofits or organizations that I'm providing pro bono service to or sitting on boards of directors, because that's the
Right.
sort of mentality that I come to my board responsibilities with, is a business perspective, as well as bringing those same skills that I would offer to any other client.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Because sometimes, there are requirements to be on these boards, and I know you're part of a number of them, so we can go through the list next, and then you can let me know what each one does and what you do with them. But it's very important. Like, I feel like one of the biggest questions I get from people is like, how do you make money from a nonprofit, right? Or how does a nonprofit make money? And sometimes it's hard to answer, because then I start thinking about, oh, well, they get funding. If the funding goes away, then the money's not there anymore, right? And they have a social enterprise, which means they're doing it for the betterment of the community or the groups they're targeting. But so no, I appreciate that you come in and you have like, I don't want to say kind of like a sliding scale, but it's something similar. But yeah, just using your example, you have the pyramid where you have like market rate clients, and then you have other clients, that you go in and do different work for. But one thing I was going to ask you is like, why don't you list to me the list of the organizations you're part of? Because I know you do sit on a number of boards. Maybe you can tell me a few of them, and then let me know, any of the new projects that you're working on with them at the moment. Yeah, and we'll take it from there.
Absolutely. So I was a longtime board member of Honor PAC, which is one of the nation's only Latinx LGBT political action committee, which is a 501. It's not a 501c3. It's usually a 501c4 or C5 political action committee, and their purpose or their mission is to essentially fundraise for elected candidates, and to help to provide support and resources to get them into office that support the platform of the PAC. And of course, Honor PAC is primarily dedicated to advancing a very holistic and comprehensive policy agenda on behalf of the Latinx LGBT community, locally, statewide, and nationally. And then, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and with that, do you guys only back up LGBT, political candidates?
No, absolutely not. Again, because it's the mission of the organization is to advance a platform. It doesn't really matter who that candidate is. Ideally, of course, we always want to be supportive as much as possible to Latinx and LGBT political candidates, but there are many allies out there nowadays, thank God, that want to sign up for Honor PAC's agenda. And there are even, believe it or not, some Republicans out there that want to advance the agenda, some straight, white, cisgender folks that want to advance the agenda, and they're all coming to Honor PAC to seek their endorsement. So I think that that's a beautiful trend to see in the political landscape, that candidates of all denominations and all orientations are seeking the endorsement. I actually recently completed my term on Honor PAC, and I've also begun to do some committee work with the Latino Coalition of Los Angeles, which is also a 501c4. And they are also an organization that is dedicated to investing in political candidates that advance a very progressive Latinx agenda focused on Southern California and California at large.
All right. So question, in terms of being on these boards, right? Is there any adversities or any struggles that you faced as a Latinx queer, Chicano, or something, or any advice you want to give, someone out there that wants to be part of these boards? Because, sometimes you feel like the names become labels, and then they become kind of, the names of these organizations become labels and stereotypes, right? Or like, oh, well, that's a woman's group, or that's a man's group, or that's a LGBT group only. So I don't know, any kind of like adversity that you faced being in any of these groups, or things you would like to see change.
Well, I'm also on the board of the Public Policy and International Affairs Fellowship Program, which is a national board, and they're responsible for the PPIA program. And that program is actually a fellowship that funds graduate school. So it was the same back, maybe 22 years ago or however long it was. I was a PPIA fellow who received support to attend graduate school, and eventually received my master's degree from UCLA School of Public Affairs. In both that board, as well as even with Honor Pack, as well as even with the Latino Coalition of Los Angeles, these organizations, they do get I guess people associate certain characteristics with the organization. Whether or not it's accurate or not says something else. But to answer your question, the only real sort of challenges that I've ever experienced being on a board of directors really has to do with sort of the two things. Number one, the direction, the future of the organization, and number two, with frankly differences in opinions in terms of leadership or other board members in terms of the pathway forward, for the organization.
Right.
Of course, I always think of things in business terms, I think of things in terms of sustainability. I think of things in terms of, you have a particular product, you want to get that product, even nonprofits, you have a particular product, you want to communicate on that product, you want to engage people around the product, and you want to be compensated, for that product. And so identifying what that product is, what the value proposition is of the organization, what you should be compensated for, and then how to go out into the world and get that, engage others and be compensated for, the valuable service or product that the nonprofit provides, right?
Yeah.
That creating consensus around that set of priorities and that direction, that has always been where I think the conflict that I've experienced has arisen from. But for me, I think that's a good fight to have, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm going to have a fight or if I'm going to have a disagreement, I think it should be around high level priorities, high level direction setting, strategy, and sort of the pinnings of the organization. I think that those are good conflicts and discussions to have, and I welcome those conversations.
Yeah, no, that's good. I'm glad that, you're bringing the business acumen to these meetings. And, because at the end of the day, I wonder if people struggle with the idea of like, and maybe it's just a societal norm we have where we decide that, social work or nonprofit work is devalued, right? In terms of monetary compensation. So no, I'm glad that you're having these conversations and that you're out there and you're pushing that forward, because so many people, I've always been like really good with finances, obviously, but like actually that's one of the reasons why I asked this question in my podcast. Like, and moving along to the next question is like, which financial lesson would you want, the audience to take away from this podcast today? Because from this episode, because, so many people, I think, find it hard to like be in business by themselves or to go into a social enterprise as like the field of work they're going to work in moving forward, and some people get burnt out as well. But what is one financial lesson that you would want someone to take away with them today?
And this is a lesson that I'm going to be completely transparent with you, Randy. I had to learn the hard way. And I know this is going to sound a little bit contrived, but looking back, and if I had to do it all over again, even if even if I couldn't afford it, or maybe even if I couldn't maybe do the full suite of services, I would have hired a bookkeeper or an accountant early on, because
Hmm.
I would only do it when I was filing taxes. But there's so much more that a good accountant help you with throughout the year that really makes a huge difference in so many different respects. And I know it's,
Yes.
again, it sounds a little contrived, obviously, because of the field that you're in, but I'm being very authentic and genuine in saying that, like, looking back, if there was one thing that I would do over again, it would be, even if it wasn't, even if it was like so basic, like even if it was like I just talked to somebody, maybe like, I don't know, 3 times a year for 30 minutes, just even something so basic like that.
Right.
I
Right.
really feel like it would have really saved me a lot of difficulties and challenges in my business, and frankly, even challenges that are still being dealt with to a certain extent today. And thankfully, I have a really good accounting team that's
Hmm.
been helping me out. But and they're also now sort of implementing strategies to even shore up my financial future and my business's future.
Yeah.
I think that would be the one thing that I would really, looking back, recommend strong, the most basic level.
No, I'm actually really glad you bring that up, right? Because that is what I do for a living. I help small businesses guide them through, their taxes and their dealings with the IRS and the state. And I actually don't do a lot of that stuff myself, meaning like I do like payroll stuff, I outsource that, right? But I connect my client to the right, payroll people, because there's a lot of different services out there. So one of the things is that when someone comes to me, sometimes they come with me and they're a huge mess, meaning there's no payroll, they haven't filed the right tax returns for many years, and moving forward, all I could do is kind of like, put bandages on a cut here and there, but then moving forward, I think I need to move them over to a different mindset, right? Which is probably the strongest hurdle you need to pass. But once we get through that, I find that like once I'm able to guide my clients through, the accounting portion of taxes, and then the actual preparation of taxes, and then the pre-planning that comes, the whole year before that, right? So if you're talking, like you said, I like that you said if you're checking in with your accountant maybe 3 times a year, that might not seem like a lot, but checking in will create more to-do tasks, right? And will set you up for success, meaning, oh, I need to get this done before, or you have estimates you need to look at, right? So not a lot of people like actually reach out to accountants when they're first starting businesses. So I'm glad you bring that up. If someone asks me what I should do, it's like you should reach out to an attorney, you should reach out to an accountant, one for your incorporation, and then the other one, to set up your business, because once you incorporate, you're not done, right? There's a bunch of compliance items that come with incorporating as an actual LLC or an S corp. So no, thank you for being very honest, because I feel like, so many people, I don't know if it's just our community or if it's just in general, America, you don't talk about finances, you don't talk about, money. It's like a hush hush topic. But I think it's very important to talk about it and to be very transparent, because, I don't want the generation after me coming and making these same mistakes, because now that I've been doing this for 11 years, I can see how so many people can run into the mistakes of getting hit with penalties because they didn't know of a filing requirement, right? You can incorporate, you can start running businesses here in the US very easily, but the compliance, I think, is what really gets people owing thousands of dollars afterwards, or even, like you said, dealing with issues like years later. I have I have clients who think they're S corps, but they never really change from being a C corp. So that is huge because obviously that has now you have to come and do your personal returns when you're an S corp, right? So it has repercussions there, but no, thank you for providing that information because I think it's very honest, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I wish somebody had. I mean, I think folks did try to tell me, but I was so focused on growing my business, growing my practice, growing my consultants and my work, which frankly it takes a lot of work. And to be clear, like even having an accountant, a good accountant, there is some work involved. On the client side, there is some lift, and it does take time. So, especially in the beginning, when you're really trying to address any outstanding issues. But I can also say, in retrospect, so I just encourage any and all business owners out there, even if, again, the engagement with an accountant is minimal, even if it's just a few conversations per year, even if it's only for 15 minutes or 30 minutes, I think starting there is time well spent and definitely money well spent. And yeah, I agree with you, Randy, that there is some, I don't know if it's taboo or maybe shame or even sort of resistance around talking about money and finances, but and it's something that I feel like I've had to come out in my life like 5 times or something like that. And so I started to lose count. Actually, there was something recently I had to come out to myself on acceptance of kind of who I am, basically of who I am, really. And one of those 5 coming out moments was I really to accept myself as a owner, and more importantly, as an entrepreneur, and more specifically around, entrepreneurs are people who essentially see things that don't exist and bring them into being. And people never, no one ever told me that. Like, no one ever sat down, certainly when I was in elementary school, like we didn't even have business classes. And I went to a really great, elementary school and high school had business classes, which would have been an opportunity to apply a lot of the learning across different courses into something tangible and something specific. But no one really told me that entrepreneurs are people who see things that don't exist and they bring them into being, and most importantly, they get compensated for that effort, for that work. And no one told me, first of all, no one told me that that was a thing. No one told me that that was something that you could do, for a living. But then the other part that I had to sort of come into acceptance was that I really enjoy making money. And when I say that, I enjoy making money not for the sake of making money. I enjoy making money because what it means is implicitly the only way that I can do that is I have to engage others. I have to bring others into that process, and I have to invest in the future of other people, in their skills, in their livelihood, in their lives. And I have to do it in a way that ultimately doesn't need me, and doesn't need me in the same way that I started the endeavor, right? And so that's the part that's super exciting to me. That's the part that it's not money. It's not money for the sake of money. It's money for as a tool for enhancing and expanding opportunity.
I love that. I love that, because maybe it's because we come from a background where like we're taught just to like keep our heads down and work, right? You get an 8 to 5, you make money and you go home and then you go back the next day. But, being an entrepreneur, it is no longer an 8 to 5. Actually, I saw a meme out there that said I didn't want to work at 9 to 5, so now I'm working 24/7. It is a lot of work. It's a lot more work. It's like nonstop, but I think it's totally worth the benefits. And you're right. You are taking a bigger risk than like just going in and clocking out. So therefore, the reward should be bigger, right? And I'm glad you bring that up, because for the longest time, like, I went to an undergrad, went to Pitzer College, which is, they call it a big old hippie school because it came about in the 70s. And I loved it. And it's all about social enterprise there, right? So one of my majors was sociology. But then I also felt kind of shame wanting and expressing that I wanted more money, that I needed to make more money. We don't come from a background where, like, my parents were going to be able to, like, host me for an indefinite amount of time, in their home. And at some point, I need to start, like, helping out with the bills. So stuff like that. And then on top of that, I have student loans now, right? So I think there's so much shame and stigma around money and finances that, if there's anything that I can do, at least with my podcast, is say, it's okay to make money. It's okay, to ask for more money or to make more money, or charge more, because we're so used to this idea that, like, our community doesn't have value, or that if we do have value, it's very low compared to the other, you know?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, to that point, I mean, I'm not going to say that the issue is completely resolved. In fact, literally, I mean, I've been doing this now for 11 years. Our anniversary is in August every year for the firm, and I'm literally having a conversation this week about my pricing for my services. Someone,
Oh, wow.
a mentor, kind of just pulled me aside recently and was like, you need to rethink your pricing, and I'm going to help you do it, because you are not charging what you should for work that's conducted by similar firms. And I knew that, of course. Of course, I knew that. I mean, of course, I knew that. But I also have a certain type of a business model that, was based upon, again, back to the upside down, can be modified and adjusted, and has been along the way. But even to this very moment, as I speak, that issue of being compensated and valuing your work, it's something that is ongoing, and it isn't something that's just a closed conversation and you do it once and you're done. As your business grows, you enter new markets, you're able to do new things. And so you do need to have those honest conversations and have mentors that will help you gain perspective, right, on your work and the value that it deserves. So it's and even accounting, like, none of these things that I'm saying are things that ever really stop. They're things that are ongoing, but they're things that if you embrace early on, you're a lot, then rather than fighting it or resisting it, you will be a lot better off. So that's kind of, I guess, the moral of the story.
Yeah, no, definitely. Okay, well, Richard, I'm reaching the final question, and really my question is, any final takeaways or piece of advice that you would give the next generation of LatinX business owners, small entrepreneurs? What would be, like, your advice, or something you recommend? Yeah.
Just from my own experience, I've had to get out of my way and accept who I am, how I work, what I deserve, and accepting that each of us has a different style. Each of us has a different approach, and it's up to you to sort of cultivate your own style of business, your own approach to business. There are certain elements of business that you're never going to be able to get around, and that you should embrace early on. And I've spoken about that. But beyond that, there are certain folks that we all have different styles, as we do with both our aesthetics and appearance, but also in terms of business, right? And it took me a long time to accept my own style and not feel like I was somehow not either doing it right or not as good as somebody else or not in the correct way. Some people have a very sort of soft approach. Some people have a much more aggressive approach in terms of their business stylings and dealings, right? And so
Right.
it took me a long time to sort of accept and embrace my personal style of business and then engage others around that because when I was younger there were these sort of icons of business and you're told that this is how you do business, this is how you should do business, and when you actually step into your own space, you step your own approach and style, it usually doesn't look like that. It usually looks different and it feels different. And so again, getting out of your own way, accepting your own style, your own approach to business, however that may be, and engaging others around that, and being okay with that. Being okay that you're not like the business people that you see or maybe read about,
Hmm.
on television or, in the movies or whatever. Putting that away and really
Right.
allowing yourself, giving yourself the freedom and the space and the respect that you deserve to find out for yourself what kind of an entrepreneur you are, and really falling in love with that and being okay with what that looks like, how it feels, and both the good and the bad. You know.
Yeah, no, I love that. Because of course I went to business school, so there's a very, very clear picture of what an entrepreneur looks like, right?
Right.
So I'm glad that you bring that up because so many people take different routes. So many people end up at different, ventures, but there's not one way of getting to it. But I appreciate that advice. And Richard, yes, I also thank you for being on the show today because I think you've given us so much information. Especially if someone out there's trying to be a consultant, I think that they can go back and listen to your experience and see how you went into it. But also, your roots, like it's almost as if you were meant to be a consultant in your life, right? From your family, from your mother's roots of being like business oriented and your father's roots being more academic. I greatly, greatly appreciate your time. I know you're busy. I know you have a project to go work on next. But again, thank you so much for being on the show today.
No, it's an absolute pleasure, Randy. Thank you so much for, providing this forum. And it's funny you concluded with, that it seems like I was always meant to be a consultant because, even when I first saw consultants that came, to UCLA, like I said, I liked what they did, but they didn't look like me, and they didn't come from places that there was a
Mhm.
lot of sort of questioning and coming out and
Yeah.
acceptance of, well, if I'm going to do this, it's going to have to be fundamentally very different than what was presented to me, and that's another clear example of what I was talking about in terms of really accepting the fact that your path may be fundamentally different from what you've seen, and really loving and embracing that and being okay with that and sort of letting yourself off the hook. And so thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you, Randy. Thank you for
Yes.
the space and I think you're doing a great service to our community, so keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode. Please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and share this podcast with your network. Your support helps our LatinX business community grow stronger with every listen, and I truly invite you to connect with us. Send us your questions, your comments, or even your own business stories to randy@rgtaxes.com. I would love to hear from you. Until next time, keep learning, keep building your business, and keep growing your business mindset.